Hello and welcome back to Brad's Labs. So today we're going to be taken back to a very turbulent time in Irish history. This was requested by JP. He's a comic book creator in Ireland and I highly recommend checking out his stuff. So without further ado, let's go see what was happening at the end of the 18th century in Ireland. But as always, before we can send our time traveler back, we need to know what they want. JP has asked to be sent back to Ireland in 1798, and if you know anything about your Irish history, you probably already know where this is going. He has asked to be a 27-year-old male and a farmer. But before we can make this video possible, I needed to ask JP one very important question. What was his religion going to be? Now normally I don't talk about religion, it's a principle thing, but I had to know so that we could actually build this story up. In Ireland, religion has played a large part of who they are, and it still plays a large part of who they are. But I needed to know if he wanted to be a Catholic or a Protestant. And that was absolutely necessary because it would have quite literally shaped the way the world viewed him and the way he viewed the world. Before we get into the time travel aspect of it though, I feel it's important to make this point. These laws that were passed by the British Parliament were passed on Catholics. That was Catholics for both England and Ireland. But the laws did disproportionately affect those in Ireland, with Ireland being largely Catholic. In 1722, there was an attempt to put a Catholic back onto the throne, or an alleged attempt, and this actually led to greater tightening of the laws on Catholics. JP hops into the time machine and he's rocketed back. But before we get into that, let's take and talk about the easy stuff. He was born in 1771. He was born in his family's home. He is the oldest. He has 3 other brothers. And the house that they lived in would have been 10 meters by 4 meters if they were lucky. It would have had a thatched roof. And all in all, JP would have grown up doing pretty hard work by hand. If they were lucky, they might have been able to afford a horse. The sights and the sounds and the smells would have been actually fairly nice compared to what Megan had to deal with. He's got fresh air, the smell of his animals, and the smell of the body odor from him and his family. So all in all, it would have been a fairly peaceful life, except for some glaring details. They would have lived off of what they can make themselves. The livestock they would have been sheep, pigs, and some chickens. And they would farm potatoes. When potatoes were introduced from the Americas into Ireland, they grew really well. Ireland's soil is very acidic, so crops don't take well to growing there, but potatoes took very well. So they would have grown quite a few potatoes. That would have fed them. They would have sold the potatoes at market, sold them to friends and whatnot. All in all, it wasn't a terrible life. But then, so let's fast forward now. JP is 26 years old and his father dies at the ripe old age of 42, which was pretty good at that time. Normally when his father dies, all the land would be passed down to the eldest son. That's not the case here. The Property Act of 1703 actually forbids Catholics from passing all their land down to the eldest son, which would be JP. Instead, the land has to be broken up equally amongst all of the sons. So if he has 100 acres, each son only gets 25 acres. Now, that's not to say that one of the brothers doesn't decide to become a Protestant. If he converts, all of the land goes to him. That would just mean that JP and all of his other family would just be out. They wouldn't have any land, they wouldn't have any house. They would have to figure out what to do for themselves. So at the end of the day, the Church of England just waged a holy war on the Catholics, but they didn't do it with guns, although that did happen. Instead, they did it by taking financial stability away from people. You now have several generations that are affected by these laws. And I say several generations because the life expectancy is only around 40. And, good for his father for making it all the way to 42. But some of the first laws were called the penal laws, and they were put into place in 1703. So this means that he would have had to deal with these laws, his father would have had to deal with the laws, his father's father, his father's father, before that Cromwell. It keeps going, but there was a lot of things that just kind of built up to what we're getting to. History seldom goes the way we want it to go. And with this in mind, JP's brother decides to become Protestant. He takes all the land, leaving JP homeless, no money, no food, nothing. So JP only has a few options ahead of him. One, he could just scrape together a living by doing odd jobs for people. Two, he could get on a ship, head to the Americas, and he'll be in much the same situation he is right now, homeless and without any food. Or he can take and join the United Irishmen. He's heard talk of them. He even knows a few people who have gone off and joined them. The United Irishmen was a political organization founded in 1791 by Theobald Wolfe Tone, James Napper Tandy, and Thomas Russell. And up to this point, JP really didn't have any reason to consider joining them. He was going to get some land when his father died. It wasn't going to be much, but it was going to be his land. But now he's left with no land. He has nothing. So JP decides, you know what, I'm going to change some things. I'm going to go ahead and join up with the United Irishmen. The United Irishmen worked with the French on two separate occasions to try to take Ireland from England. The first was in 1796 and the second in 1798, but both attempts failed. The first attempt was December of 1796. They left France with 43 ships and around 14,000 men. But a storm hit off the west coast of Cork and Kerry, and they had to turn around. The second attempt was in September of 1798, and this was only after fighting had already broken out in Ireland, and there was a new military leader in France called Napoleon Bonaparte. I think you might have heard of him. But he really didn't have much of an interest in what was going on, so he only gave them around 3,000 men to take and go to Ireland with. This was only really enough to do coastal raids, and even then it wasn't enough to do that. On the 18th of May, Lord Fitzgerald was fatally wounded while trying to resist arrest. He was one of the main military leaders for the United Irishmen, and after news got out of what happened, on the 23rd of May, the United Irishmen decided that they were going to start the rebellion. They started off by stopping stagecoaches that were carrying mail, leaving Dublin. This is where we find JP. Let's look at the events that led up to JP stopping the mail coaches. He's sitting in a pub in Kildare, and he's having drinks with other like-minded individuals, when the news of Lord Fitzgerald comes into the pub, and all of a sudden the pub is flurry with talking, with yelling, with anger, and they start to make plans. So JP and his fellow Irishmen make their way to Dublin, and that's where they decide they're going to start stopping the mail coaches. Well, the British don't take too kindly to this disruption of their mail, so they send out their very well-trained, very well-equipped army to deal with the individuals. The Irishmen had no chance whatsoever. They were extremely ill-equipped and ill-trained to deal with the regulars that the British Army had. They were very quickly overpowered. Dublin was put into lockdown, but it never really needed to be because it wasn't really actually under much of a threat. Those who could get away, got away. Those who couldn't get away either lie dead or they were arrested, and they most certainly would be hung for treason. JP manages to make it away from Dublin, and he hears that Wexford has actually managed to make a little bit of headway with what's going on down there. So he makes his way down to Wexford to join the battle. He still has the taste of blood in his mouth, and he wants more. He needs more. So he makes his way to Wexford. He gets there, and on the 21st of June, a battle commences at Vinegar Hill. Battle of Vinegar Hill begins, and it didn't last very long. It only lasted for about 4 hours. On the hill, there were about 20,000 men, women, and children from Ireland, up against only 10,000 of the British forces. But these men, women, and children, they weren't trained. The British forces were. The British bombarded the hill with artillery, and not too long after they stopped, they stormed the hill. When all was said and done, there was 1,500 people dead. Those who that were able to escape went into the hillsides to take and either fight again or decided that they were just done. JP manages to get away, but he decides he's done with fighting. But he hears one last attempt to get the rebellion going when a French general named John Humbert lands in County Mayo at Killabay. He only lands with about 1,100 troops, and he relies heavily on the local population to help with any victories he can get. But they managed to secure a victory at Castle Bar on August 27th. But these victories were short-lived. On the 8th of September, he actually had to surrender him and his troops to the British. Wolfe Tone, the guy that helped start all of this, was actually captured at sea by the British not too long after. And he was tried and he was going to be hung, but he decided he wasn't going to give them the pleasure, and he took his own life before they could hang him. Now all the fighting is done, JP has one of two options ahead of him. He can either stay in the country but constantly look over his shoulder, or he can leave the country. And this is a country that he's loved since he can remember. He's literally shed blood for this country. It's a hard choice no matter which one he makes. Why did all of this fail? Well, in short, it was due to a lack of leadership, but that was in large part due to the British. They systematically went through and targeted all the leadership of the United Irishmen to take and try to stop them, and they did this by whatever means they could. When everything was all said and done, without leadership, this was all doomed to fail from the beginning, and the British knew that. So the British did what the British do, and they make sure they control the power as much as possible. This ultimately led to the Irish Parliament being abolished, and then 1801, they actually became part of the United Kingdom in Britain. I hope you did enjoy the video today. I know it wasn't as funny as last week's, and I'm not saying that women suffering is funny, but this one didn't really lend itself to much humor because it is a darker topic. Unfortunately, most of history is like that. It's full of these David and Goliath events, but David doesn't always come out on top. If you did like this, next week we're going to China. We're going back to the Han Dynasty. Remember to give it a like, share, and a subscribe. And I do hope that you guys have a better day than they did, and take your victories where you can get them.